The Windows SSD issue, I really, really hope that it's addressed. I haven't watched this yet. Let's see what Jay says.
I bet you NVIDIA is loving all of the attention that the SSD community is currently getting right now. There's been some developments over the last few days regarding the SSD stuff. Everyone's trying to drill down, getting to the real root cause, but the problem is we have various players in the game right now. Obviously, Phison is definitely involved in trying to figure this out, communicating with The Verge, communicating with PC DIY, who was directly involved with testing with them and early samples and such. We'll talk about why early samples is a thing in a second here. I know they've been talking with Microsoft. In fact, started doing some digging through my inbox, and I have some emails that got very buried here, even from Microsoft as well as Phison. So we're gonna talk about a few things here today, because I still think there needs to be some clarity on this, and we're gonna attempt some fixes today that could hopefully help you guys, because ever since we started doing these reports about the SSD issues going around, my inbox has been flooded.
This is some unneeded anxiety, man. I hope they fix this.
The common theme through this is it seems really random, which makes it even harder to get to the root of why all this is happening. So it's been a while since The Verge memes when it comes to the PC building, but I digress. The Verge is still very much a large publication when it comes to the tech sphere. So we're gonna go through their article here real quick. I'll try to link it, but basically the title, this is what's interesting to me here, is the title alone. It says, Windows 11 SSD issues are blamed on reviewers using early versions of firmware. Now, I don't think, Phil and I talked about this, we don't think they're referring to us when it comes to that, because of the fact that, as I said, PC DIY has been the ones working directly with Phison.
I don't like where this is going. You're gonna blame the reviewers?
On trying to recreate these problems and stuff. So one of the things that you'll notice in this article here, and I guess we could go through it line by line, it's pretty short, is there's this perception, or at least this claim, that the drives that are having the biggest problems from Phison, or in this instance, they're almost kind of stating the only drives having problems from Phison are Phison drives that are using early firmwares, which would be like pre-release demo drives, which are intended to showcase the technology of the drive, but they're not public facing, they're not public renditions of the drive. That's why here, internally, we have a very strict policy with brands that are gonna send us something to review, especially if it's a performance review, it must be retail sample or retail version. Because what good does it do you to consume content when we show you something if it's not going to be indicative of exactly what you're getting? So that's one of the reasons why we don't get involved in a lot of these early samples when it comes to things other than like CPUs and GPUs, all right? So I just want to put that out there. This is a perfect example as to why I hold that policy very close to the chest and won't budge on that. Okay, so moving on, this article is written by Tom Warren. Oh, and I believe Tom actually did reach out to me via email yesterday. So I just saw that. Here's the thing, I've been in meetings for the last few days, and a lot of this stuff rolled in, and I miss a lot of these emails, and our inbox, obviously, as you can imagine, gets hammered, so stuff like this definitely gets filtered pretty hard. Not to mention the jays2cents@gmail.com is not our email that we monitor for this sort of stuff. We have a different set of emails that we use for business partnerships and discussions with brands and whatnot. So if you're sending emails to the jays2cents@gmail.com, us seeing it is very unlikely. So that's the reason why a lot of these emails were missed. Anyway, it says reports have been circulating for the past few weeks that recent Windows 11 update KB3878 and KB2660 were causing some SSDs using Phison controllers to fail. While plenty of YouTube and TikTok videos have blamed Microsoft for the issues, Phison has identified early versions of firmware and BIOS as the problem instead. I need to pause there for a second. This does not take a lot of intelligence to understand, and I'm not calling Tom unintelligent, but what I am saying...
Can I call him unintelligent? Because I will.
As somebody that used to work specifically in software development and QA, QC, and
this guy as well.
Automation testing.
Me too.
You have cause and you have effect.
Yes.
The effect here is that the updates triggered whatever's causing this problem. So you cannot completely absolve Microsoft from any involvement on this problem. Let me be clear with that, and I will...
That's exactly where my mind was. I'm like, are you kidding me? You're gonna shift the blame onto the user and saying you were using outdated drives?
Fight anyone that argues with me on this point to the death on this one. Our rig has been together for More than a year.
Oh my!
Remember, this is
I was so
the Tai Chi
hopeful.
board, the X870E Tai Chi board. Interesting board that we chose for that, considering it's been definitely the center of many circles of discussion regarding burning up X3D CPUs and driver, or not driver, but BIOS stuff, RAM compatibility. We chose quite the path of most resistance for the system we need to be the most locked down. So all those problems pop up and there's BIOS updates and stuff to fix it. We start changing and introducing variables in the test bench, which really sort of sucks. And I wish I went with a different brand at the start, but I digress. That's neither here nor there. This is the situation we find ourselves in now, which is perfect because when that system has been running fine from December 2024 till September 2025 without a problem, and the only thing that has changed
the catalyst
is the Windows update. That is a part of the problem. So no, Phison cannot blame this purely on firmware or BIOS.
No,
that BIOS has not changed since December of 2024.
Sorry, you can't.
Neither has any of the hardware, including the drive. The only thing that changed was the Windows version. So there is ownership from Microsoft in this to some degree. I need to put that out there. That's very important. The timeline is important, okay? Moving on. Many of the reports originate from media testing conducted on hardware running early versions of firmwares and BIOS, stated Michael Wu, GM and president of Phison US in a statement to The Verge. These versions are performance preview drives and are not identical to those provided to the end users through official distribution channels. Do you see the problem with why we have this very strict policy on why we only test products that are final renditions so that you guys know what you're getting? Not, hey, we gave you a thing to show you how good it is, but the thing they're getting is different, right? Anyway, moving on. These variations of performance preview drives, already said that. We have observed the outdated firmware is still being used on some SSDs, and we encourage any reviewers facing this to leverage updated channel firmware readily available through manufacturer-provided utility updates. So for instance, the T500, let's talk about that. This is our drive right here that's been giving us problems as we demonstrated. We would update this through an update tool that we would get specifically through Crucial. But the problem here is there's no statement of what is the early firmware. Our drives are provided to us by Crucial, and these are retail. These are retail packaging, retail boxes, retail serial numbers, and they are.
I mean, that ought to be enough right there. He replicated it. Jay's replicated it on a retail drive given to him by Crucial in a retail box, and they're going to sit there and say, "Oh, you guys have an early firmware. That's why." No. And like Jay said, it's like the Windows update caused this. It wasn't having issues until the Windows update. So how are you going to blame the firmware?
Provided to us after launch. So that already doesn't hold true for us, because now we do have the software version on here. My eyes are way too freaking old and gray at this point to be able to read that. So I did take a photo of it because the camera is now my magnifying glass. It is firmware P8CR002. Now that sounds very early firmware, but that also doesn't sound pre-release firmware to me. I would think that would be a 1, maybe perhaps. There are versions 3 and 4 available on like the Crucial website, so there's clearly been firmware updates, but I need to point out these are not pre-release drives. These are not preview samples. These are exactly what you could have. It said that the 4 terabyte should have 004 as its firmware. Ours is 013, so clearly it is much, much later even. But I digress. I'm just doubling down on the point that our drives are not preview drives. The drives that PC DIY had may have been preview drives because they work directly with Phison. We've never communicated or had direct relationships with Phison when it comes to pre-release or reviews or any of that stuff. So just wanted to clarify how our situation is quickly diverging, no pun intended, from the bubble at which they're Phison saying these problems exist. Okay. YouTuber Jay2Cents claimed this week that the Windows Update and SSD problem is way worse than we thought. Jay2Cents showed the Crucial T500 drive with the Phison E25 controller, ding, failing after Microsoft's latest Windows 11 security updates and needing a power cycle to come back to life. It's not clear whether Jay2Cents was using a pre-release SSD firmware or even an early motherboard BIOS. Well, one, no one said what the pre-release version is, so I don't know, but it's 002 and it was provided from a retail set.
They mentioned him in this article.
The BIOS, let's talk about that real quick on the motherboard. We're on BIOS version 3.17 on the X870E Tai Chi. That is a BIOS.
Why are they putting Jay2Cents on the defensive? Boy, this is some classic KGB tactics, boy. Special tactics. They got him on the defensive. There's some crazy mind games going on here, man.
That was a beta BIOS at the time that we installed it. It actually released on December 24th, 2025, and it was one of the first. Oh, damn it. It was actually released on December 24th, Christmas Eve, 2024, and it was one of the BIOS that they were beta testing back when some of the earliest reports of 9800X3Ds having some potential burnout problems. I don't mean the singeing on the CPU, which was a user problem, but I mean like it was actually that there were starting to be CPU degradation or death to those CPUs. So that was one of the BIOS that they had released as a beta to sort of try and combat that from becoming a widespread problem. Let me fast forward here to a different email that I got from a Dutch tech journalist. This was actually yesterday. I'm not going to read his whole email here, but for instance, it says, the claim is that the BIOS on your ASRock X870E Tai Chi motherboard is version 3.17.TS03, which is not a publicly available BIOS, and it was never available for people to download, and it is fairly old. False. Absolutely false. So if you're gonna do journalism, get it right, because that BIOS was absolutely available. In fact, we've got Reddit posts right here. You can see screenshots here. It was absolutely public facing. We have no contacts at ASRock. We did not receive anything as a media reviewer BIOS that was never public facing. Again,
Jay's hitting with the false.
Removing us more from this artificially created bubble where this problem could exist. So that's false, 100% false right there. The interesting thing is the 3.17 BIOS is the only BIOS that has been pulled so far from the ASRock website, specifically for the X870 Tai Chi. The 3.17 was a beta, released publicly, specifically kind of in a knee-jerk reaction to the 9800X3D reports that were happening at the end of 2024. Get it right, please, especially if you're gonna drag us into this saying that, or almost like side-handedly claiming that there's this artificial situation that's not a real public-facing hardware setup that would be affecting consumers, because that's absolutely wrong. Yeah, the list of questions here.
They're basically accusing this is some really foul stuff that's happening. They're accused. It's some indirect accusations that this is being manufactured, and his name is being thrown around in this. And I would feel a little bit perturbed too.
So I'll answer them for you publicly, since you're doing the journalism thing, or at least trying to. It says, can you confirm or deny the usage of the older BIOS version? It was on screen, people saw it. 3.17 is what we're using. There's no lie about that. I've already explained why we kept the BIOS as it was, because everything's working. And when you have a test bench, you do not change the BIOS versions, because with the GESA changes and other things that happen, and specifically with AMD, BIOS changes, even though your settings may be identical as what they were previously, can have an impact in overall performance of the system, which then makes our GPU benchmarks obsolete and out of date. So that's why we locked them down, and that's actually specifically on the guidance from Stephen Burke at Gamers Nexus himself when he sat right here in this chair. So that's why that BIOS is still there. It's just really odd that the one BIOS we're on right now is the one that got removed. So I think ASRock may have identified maybe other issues. Obviously the SSD problems didn't come up yet because the update from Windows hadn't come out yet to cause the triggering of these issues. There had to have been other issues with that BIOS that caused them to pull it, right? That's the only reason why a BIOS would be pulled. Anyway, can you elaborate on this matter? Just did. Can you deny or confirm the claimed lack of communication back from you? Oh, this is what bothers me right here. It says, he goes on to say, furthermore, Phison states, and they quote, they put this in quote, if you're gonna do journalism, I hope this is exactly how they said it, reached out to the YouTuber directly and through various third parties and have never returned our request to chat. Now, I did find the email specifically from Phison 8 days ago, buried in the email inbox I just stated. They basically said, since your video went live at Phison, we tried this test over 90 times with identical hardware. I'm paraphrasing here. In their US lab using the X870E Tai Chi, over 60 tests with identical hardware. So, Taiwan did it 90 times. Here in the US lab, they did it 60 times with identical hardware. The one thing that we're not able to match is the motherboard BIOS. In the video, the BIOS shows 3.17, but that is not the version available for download. The latest version is 3.25. This is where I'm just really starting to get frustrated here. The latest version is actually 3.40, and that was available as of 9/1. Now, today is the 10th. They wrote this email 8 days ago. I believe 3.35 might be the latest before that. Let's see. Oh no, 3.30 was 6/16. And then on 9/1, they launched 3.40. 3.25 launched in 5/15. So even at the time they wrote this email, 3.25 was not the latest. So I don't know why they're calling that the latest. Anyway, I already explained why we're using 3.17. And so anyway, there's that. It says that they're desperate to get the drive and see what's happening. I have no problem sending you this drive. I need to wipe it though. There's a lot of personal, business stuff on here. So I do need to cleanse this drive, or sanitize the drive, I should say. But we are gonna do some more testing with it today, because I want to see if we can come up with a way to make the problem go away, because that's what we want to communicate to our audience, not this whole he said, she said, finger pointing thing. The problem is
it's exactly what it sounds like what's happening, man. There's a lot of finger pointing. There's a lot of it's not our fault. It's not our fault. I haven't heard Microsoft say anything yet. And this is a very important point that Jay made in the beginning. The Microsoft update is what started all this nonsense. The drives were fine until the Microsoft update. Now they're like, oh, y'all should update the BIOS. You can update the BIOS and the firmware. The firmware you do on the hard, on the firmware. You just the BIOS. Make sure your BIOS, you're on the wrong BIOS. What are you doing in your BIOS? The firmware. The BIOS. The firmware.
Amount of people that ever since 3878 went live that are experiencing SSD dropouts or the file system somehow converting to RAW. And the reason why I'm saying it shows RAW is I've had tons of people send me their screenshots of making their drives fail as a secondary drive so the system doesn't crash so they can see what happens with it. And the drive still is technically there and visible, but the file structure system changed to RAW, which basically means the controller is saying no data, no partitions, nothing is on this drive. It hasn't been formatted in any way whatsoever.
Oh, that's ugly.
And then you power cycle it and the controller comes back to life. And then it's like, oh, here's the partitions and here's the bootloader and all that stuff. So right now I just feel like I'm being surrounded with misinformation on specifically even the way our testing is going here. But again, I don't care about any of that. I care about making this work for you guys. So here's what we're gonna do. We know we're on 002 on the firmware on this. What I'm going to do first is I'm going to update to 3.18 on our BIOS. I'm not gonna go all the way to 3.40. That's a huge jump from where we are now. But the claim that we were still using early BIOS for our motherboard, I don't find 3.17 when 3.08 was the original launch BIOS. And you could actually take that back. I'm sorry. 3.04 was the first release, then 3.06, then 3.08, then 3.10, then 3.12, 3.15, 3.16, absence of 3.17, 3.18, 20, 25, 30, and 40. We're literally right in the middle. I don't call that an early BIOS. I really don't. And here's the problem. Most people are not going around updating their BIOS constantly. So I'm going to go to 3.18, specifically because
that's a good point.
Phison themselves said they couldn't get the problem to happen on 3.18. If that fixes the problem, then we know it's now an intersect of something on 3.17, regardless of the firmware, and that update. The update is still a major clue. It's kind of like the New World game that was causing 3080s to melt or crash or burn up hotspots.
Good analogy.
Remember that problem when 3080s were dying? The game wasn't the problem.
The game
exposed a problem.
Yep.
The update is exposing something, but the update was the trigger, and we want to get to the bottom of that. So now that I've been formally brought up to speed with all the emails apparently that I have been refusing to respond to, and then this whole through various third parties and stuff, one email. I received one email from Phison and one email from Microsoft. And they were buried in a box that I told you we don't monitor. So with all that out of the way, let's see if we can fix the damn thing. So before I do any changes right now, we threw the problematic drive back in the system, and I'm just gonna rerun the same test that we did in F1 that can make it happen. I still don't feel like the BIOS is gonna fix anything. That's the first thing I'm gonna do, like I said, because that would kind of mean that we would limit down the amount of people that are experiencing this problem to those running a Phison drive with specifically a 5090 Founders, I don't know if, right? 5090 Founders and an X870E Tai Chi motherboard running specifically 3.17 BIOS. Like that's the bubble I've referred to multiple times. Steam is currently offline mode. Oh, I think my wire popped out. Yep, boop, okay. So that's not the case though. The people emailing me are running very sporadic combinations of hardware. But the one thing that we just kind of started talking about here that I haven't really drilled down to or even been able to generate any statistics on is how many people are experiencing the problem on AMD versus Intel, right? So that I don't know, because I think as soon as you change the platform, well, you've now removed the BIOS as being the problem. And I don't think the BIOS is going to fix anything, but that's where we're going to start. Oh wait, error reading data. It already happened. I didn't even get into the game. And there goes. Wow, that's the earliest it's ever failed on us. Wait. Are you going to blue screen or do anything interesting, or are you just going to locked? Okay, well.
That's ugly.
Wasn't even
That is ugly.
Oh, you should have done a lot of hours.
Oh, okay. Well, I don't think it'll take long to do it again.
Let's do it again.
All right, let's see how long it survives.
That is ugly how fast that happened,
Holy cow,
man.
it never. Oh,
Yeah, it's already, I think, weird. As soon as you hit load, it started acting weird.
okay. So that's a reset without a power cycle. Is going to go into BIOS and BIOS. Okay, confirmed, still there. It should be. Nothing changed. This is the point of having a locked down system. So I'm going to go ahead and just, instead of doing 3.18 as the beta, I'm going to do
That's the face of a man who used to do QA.
down system.
That is called a QA face. This is why we have a lockdown system. This is why we have a test environment. This is why we keep the versions the way they are. See if I can do it. I don't quite get it like Jay.
So I'm going to go ahead and just, instead of doing 3.18 as the beta, I'm gonna do the 3.20 since it's the first full non-beta release after the one that we have now. So I'm gonna do 3.20. So going to flash that BIOS, our little, our NVIDIA USB stick thing, which everyone loves because it looks like a 10 series GPU, a lot of BIOS won't read it for some reason. So I pulled this one out of the drawer. And when I plug this in, look at what's on it. 3.17.TS03. We downloaded that on January 10th, 2025. Remember when I said the BIOS came out 12/24/24, it had been out already at least that long by the time we got it. So there's your proof that we were not provided that drive or that BIOS early, or as a public facing driver or BIOS. So I just think that's hilarious. I'm gonna actually save this now because you know why? I'll gladly send that to Phison if they want to double check it. But I still don't think that's a problem. I really don't. All right, back in Windows.
It's
the
so
BIOS
sad.
is now on 3.2.
It's so
the BIOS shows 3.17, but that is not the version available for download. The latest version is 3.25. I'm gonna fix anything, but that's where we're gonna start. Oh wait, okay. It had been out already at least that long by the time we got it.
It's so sad that he's on the defensive now. Like he's defending his test. And I have been on that end of the spectrum before where I find a really critical bug, something that is show-stopping, and every facet of what I did to reproduce that bug is now being questioned. And I'm having to defend myself. And I have given you the exact steps to reproduce. You've seen it. You've done it yourself. And somehow it's my fault. I know that feeling.
So
I know that feeling
that we were
all
not
too
provided
well,
that drive
man.
or that BIOS early, or as a public facing driver or BIOS. So I just think that's hilarious. I'm gonna actually save this now because you know why? I'll gladly send that to Phison if they want to double check it. But I still don't think that's a problem. I really don't. All right, back in Windows, the BIOS is now on 3.20. Our overclock is set back exactly the same, except now instead of 3.17, it's on 3.20. Can we get the same thing to happen? My instinct is yes, it's going to continue to happen because again, it's happening to people on all sorts of different hardware, including non-Phison drives. So Phison shouldn't get so worried that this is an isolated problem. It's not. I still think it's a Microsoft trigger. Something happened that it's like you went and kicked a nest and a bunch of bugs came out.
Yeah.
Right? Those bugs probably wouldn't come running and
Exactly.
scurrying out if you hadn't kicked the nest. But something had kicked the nest and it was the update that did that.
It failed already. Oh, no, it didn't.
A little update here. I've cooled my fan or my plug down to 50 degrees Celsius now. We need active cooled or water cooled cables now. Anyway, yeah, that's crazy. I had to do that with this, but I can now touch it. Anyway, my hand bumped the cable that's going into our PMD, and then that's from power supply into PMD, and then out of PMD into GPU, so we can measure the power draw. Right, it's part of our test bench. When I took the thermal camera and plugged it in, we saw that the cable was at about 107 degrees, and then the hottest point, which is actually measuring right there, which is the inside of the PMD, so like up inside there where the connector is 117 degrees Celsius. Very warm. In fact, the GPU even during then was only at 83 on the cable.
Wow.
The GPU cable was only at 83. So for
Is
some
this a
reason, the
heating
cable
issue?
right here, the Corsair cable, was well over 100 degrees Celsius. And
Is this a heating issue?
so we put a fan on there because we felt a little worried. And then just by putting a little bit of airflow over that, it dropped it down to 50. So that was something that was a little sidebar during all of this. But anyway, I just did 10 loops or 10 individual runs like we normally would on, like, say, this title without a single crash. So let's recap. The only thing I did was the thing I said I didn't think was going to make a difference, which we updated the BIOS from the 3.17 beta, which, let me remind you, for me it's been a while since I said it, but you may have forgotten, that has been on our system since January 10th of this year. It has never been a problem. But I digress. We've installed 3.20, which includes an Agesa update, because it would include the Agesa update that's in 3.18. So anything here is going to be included in that. And then an improved minority proportion of AMD 9000 CPU series boot issue. So whatever, there's an Agesa update. Now, what we were talking about potentially doing right now is reinstalling 3.17.TS03 or whatever it is, and seeing if the problem comes back. However, we don't believe if I was to, because it doesn't include an Agesa, I don't think it would overwrite the current Agesa that's now just been updated on this. Even if I was to go back to say, like, I don't know, let me install the 3.06, which has Agesa 1.2.0.a, or .0a, we still don't think that will overwrite a newer Agesa. We could be wrong, but the point is we do have a result here. So it's probably less likely that the BIOS update helped as much as the Agesa update probably helped. Now, this is not one of those things where, like, oh, we installed a beta and then things started happening and then we freaked out and we're like, look, everything's terrible or it's broken, it's Microsoft. This has been running for 9 months in this rig.
9 months.
So the trigger is still the updates. This is good because I want to leave that drive in there. That is our test drive. That was what the system was built around, and we want to keep it all together so we know when we show you a result in the future versus something we had in the past and we compare results, there's no variable that changed, with the exception of now at this point, Windows updates, and now we're on 3.20. That's an easy fix. It's just scary for a lot of people because updating their BIOS, it's one of those things like if it ain't broke, don't fix. But nothing we were experiencing here really would have pointed to BIOS being a problem.
That's a very, 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 very good point. That's how I treat a lot of my systems. Even though new stuff comes out, even though new BIOS firmware comes out, even though new drives, like I just updated firmware on my PS5 controller the other day, and it wasn't broke. So I'm like, don't if it ain't broke, don't fix it. It's like a lot of times these fixes end up adding more issues, as we saw with the Windows update. As soon as you update the Windows, you can't see your SSD anymore. It was fine before. And we got some obscure security update for some corner case situation that we're never going to encounter. Right? And somehow it affected my SSD. So yeah, it's
this and why it's still a bigger problem than the bubble at which we just solved it. I really like bubbles today. Okay, so let's kind of recap this. First of all, we started looking through my emails right now of all the emails I've received over the last, I don't know, 2 weeks or so.
Didn't I?
Of people kind of chiming in with their experience with the 3878 or 2660 update and their problems that have persisted. One, if you're going to send emails to people, it's important to include your hardware. Because the question we had right now is anyone at Intel experiencing this? I found almost a dozen emails right now that people that provided their hardware, or at least their motherboard, which we can easily determine if that's AMD or Intel. And at least half of the emails that other than the 12 I've just checked, like I have easily dozens here. But the quick spot checking, so many people don't tell me anything about what their hardware is, just what their drive was, which then it's just got to toss it because it doesn't mean anything. Because the clue here now is the AGESA. If it's an AGESA problem, or a Windows update, somehow the way it is interacting with the AGESA and drives not being up to date with that AGESA would make sense to some degree. Because again, what I can tell you is I have had just about every motherboard manufacturer represented for AMD in this list of people's hardware that did provide their hardware. So we got different chipsets, B650, B550, 870, 870E, Asus, MSI, they're all in here. So it's not limited to the ASRock motherboard. And we knew that because the amount of people have already talked about this in the different iterations of hardware. Although the PC DIY folks pretty much matched ours, right? They have the Taichi and the 5090 and all that. Their hardware ranges of what people have been sending me is very vast. So maybe this is an AGESA problem, because what he just showed you, it's not a firmware problem, at least not with 002, because that to me that sounds like a pretty early firmware for the E25, which is what's found on the T500. The BIOS update with the AGESA fixed our problem, at least as far as we can tell. I really hope it's not one of those situations now where Phil is editing this and I do more testing and then it happens. But the strangest part, though, like I said, is the fact that there was degradation. And by degradation, I mean as we continued to try and muscle through the problems we were experiencing before we realized it was our drive was behaving in a manner that was affected by this update. It got worse and worse and worse to where you guys saw I couldn't even get the test to run or even start. Just loading the game was causing problems. So the fact that we went from not being able to even launch F1 without it freaking out versus getting through 10 runs flawlessly, that is data. It is data. So anyway, this is where I need you guys to be truthful. What is your hardware? And by hardware, I just mean tell me your platform. You can put motherboard, chipset, and CPU, and if you're experiencing the problem. If you're not experiencing the problem, don't bother posting, right? Not experiencing the problem does not negate the fact that the problem exists. So that's one of those things where like somebody will be like, oh, I'm having a problem with this, yada, yada. And somebody's like, well, I have the same thing. I'm not having the problem, so you're stupid. That's the PC community in a nutshell right there. But I digress. If you're having the problem, we're only interested if you're having the problem. Please don't tell me if you're not. That's great for you, but that means nothing to those that are having the problem. Put on there your chipset, your CPU, and your drive. Because as much as I think Phison is definitely doing a CYA or a cover your ass type of approach to this, because they've already had to kind of like address the stakeholders within their own company because of this problem coming out, and Phison has a good chunk of the industry when it comes to SSD controllers, it makes sense that they would have probably the bulk of drives that seem affected by this because their controllers are in all sorts of brands. Phison, I know Phison sells their own SSD.
You're ranting, Jay!
But like there's no Phison branded drives you're gonna go buy. They're just Phison controllers that are purchased by other manufacturers making SSDs, right? So I get why Phison would kind of like have we got to put out some fires, we got to do some damage control, but I still don't believe this to be a Phison problem. I don't. I never thought it was a Phison problem to begin with.
I thought it was a Windows problem.
It's now looking like it might be a little bit on AMD on this one. And it sucks. And the reason why I say it sucks is because we definitely have always subscribed to if your system is running fine and there's no problems, don't update your BIOS. But there might be a necessity now to update your BIOS. So it kind of goes against some of the philosophies we've always had, but we've always said if it ain't broke, don't fix. But this is broke, so it needs fix.
True. I agree with Jay's assessment, man. I think that point he made in the beginning about Windows Update being the catalyst is being ignored by a lot of these people at Phison. It's like they're like, hey, you should have your firmware as a pre-release version of the firmware, and it's like, well, why was it working 9 months, even though it wasn't a pre-release of the firmware? It was working for 9 months. And then the update came out, and all of a sudden it broke, and you're going to say, oh, you need to update your firmware. Wait a minute, it was working for 9 months. It's wild. And then another thing is happening on other drives. It's not just Phison. So Phison claims it's an old firmware, but it's like, well, how come it's happening on these other drives when Windows Update came out? You're just going to discount Microsoft? Man, somebody is doing some PR control. Some PR control is happening here. So check this video out. I'll put the link in the show description. I also posted in the chat earlier for those watching. I was hoping it was fixed. But it don't sound like it's fixed. It sounds like somebody's going, it's your fault. So I'm still going to not update until there's some more definitive information. I suggest you do the same. If you're sitting on, if you're pausing your Windows update, continue to keep them paused, because I thought this video was going to give me some good news, but it's made me a little bit more concerned, actually more concerned. Bye.